You started new. What have you ever, this would be a discussion, so I guess it's a bit rhetorical because you're not going to respond, but what have you started from scratch? And like really from scratch, kind of to the point where you have to like learn all of the things in order to start the thing from scratch. So it's not even just like starting making bread from scratch if you know how to make bread already, because you have that knowledge so you can go and make the thing. It's like learning the skill to do the thing. So it's backing up a few steps. It's an interesting framework. It takes a lot of new creation to get to that point, and a lot of retraining from the things that you might have learned already, because sometimes we can learn things that take us in the wrong direction first before we can actually start from scratch. I think that can kind of maybe apply to like business-wise as well, like to start a business from scratch. So to come up with something that like, it's kind of the Shark Tank sort of ideas, where it's this is a new idea, no one's touched this before, we're going to move into this, like moving into the unknown and trying to maybe learn from things of the past, but not always being shaped by what everything else around you or everyone else around you has been doing. I was actually thinking of you in this a bit, Garth, with like what you've done business-wise of like starting from scratch. This is like from scratch, where you're with your gym equipment and such, and kind of like creating a niche and charging your way forward. I think for some of you that have inherited whether family business or farm or something like that, in a way, you're kind of starting from scratch, but if you were going to jot down the things that you do that you feel are innovative, is there a seed of what Dad used to do in that? Like, are you able to really like start from scratch or start a new initiative in that? Because the things that we've been raised up into like form us so well. So to really start something from scratch, it takes a lot of persistence and a lot of structure and training and moving forward into that new thing. It's not a simple thing to start from scratch. Yet that's what we're going to kind of see over the next little while when we look at something starting from scratch. So if you were to, just to entertain this a little bit further, if you were to say start like a commune, because I don't want to say cult. If you were going to start like your own little commune, this is actually a thing where you see like a group of friends that'll get together and like buy a chunk of land. I've read and seen in a couple different contexts where like they'll buy a chunk of land and figure out, you know, housing's expensive, so like let's just buy this land together. As much as we can do communally, we will, you know, shared things, even sometimes like shared vehicles, shared spaces, that would be like for recreation or eating together, shared meals, some of that like commune, which I say it looks like cult pretty quick. So that's like one side where taking something and starting from scratch, doing something fairly new. But then I've seen another side of it, which this maybe feels like a little bit more like, well, I could maybe latch onto that just a little bit, would be like even in recreational spaces, or like buying like a chunk of land, like buying 80 acres. And so I realize this doesn't always fit for everyone here because we're kind of, some of you live in the bush already, but some of you have space. But it might be like a group in the city, a group of friends that get together and be like, we're going to buy 80 acres of bush, and we're going to slowly carve it out to a space that is our retreat, and we do this together. And so you kind of come up with new rules. You're creating a new community. But the thing is, you bring in all the stuff of how you grew up and all the things that you believe, as a set of values come in there as well. So you're really not starting from scratch. It's so difficult to start from scratch because we've always come out of something, and we're influenced by those somethings. So how do we start from scratch? This is a huge task to do. And it's the task that's undertaken by God with a group of people before they're heading into the promised land. And so that's where we're gonna be for a little while here. And it is going to be in Deuteronomy. You can do what you like. We'll hop around a little bit in there, but you can start that way if you want. But to give just a bit of the why I say starting something from scratch is you have a group of people who for generations have been slaves, have been raised in a certain way, and maybe with this understanding of the history of who they came from, kind of, well, we know Abraham, we don't know them, that was generations ago, but we know that we are God's chosen people to a certain extent. We kind of have this like ancestry heritage we understand, but like been slaves for hundreds of years. You kind of become a certain people at that point. perhaps hopefully able to carry on and keep few of the traditions that were handed down from family to family. But for the large part, you just learned to survive under this oppressive empire that has made you slaves. So this is who the Israelites were, the Hebrew people, oppressed people. All they knew how to be were slaves, generation to generation to generation. And then God raises up Moses to come do the unthinkable. Take a nation out of slavery, deliver them out of the hand of Egypt with the goal of heading towards the promised land. So that's the target. Head there. You've got a people that only know how to be a certain way, and God's going to try and make them another way. But not even that. It's not even as simple as all that, because those people have been raised a certain way after generations of being raised a certain way, and now they're taking that into the wilderness, and they have a really big miss there where God is willing to take them in if they had the faith to believe that God would give them the land, but they didn't. And so in fear, they stay in the wilderness because God says, well, this generation that wasn't willing to trust me to get you into the land, this generation of fighting men, you're not going to make it. You're not going to come in. This next generation after. So now, stack this on top of each other. We have a generation after generation after generation that only knew how to be slaves. And now they're taken into the wilderness, and they watch their older family members, bit by bit, die in the wilderness. And now you're left with a generation that just grew up in the wilderness. So they don't even know how to be slaves anymore. They know how to wander. They know how to follow this guy Moses, follow this God, which is intangible, but somehow they have stories of what he did for them, and they're slowly starting to fade from memory maybe. So you have a group of people that don't know how to be a group of people, and God's going to show them through Moses how to be his people. This is the group. And not just group like, oh, there's like 500 of us or something like that, like hundreds of thousands of people with an identity that is just shifty, not knowing who they need to be. And they're waiting on the edge. And Moses, as for all the work that he could do, is trying to lead them. What a task in itself. But now, through what God has given him as law, he's giving this final reiteration. This is what it's going to take for you to become the people of God. And so we're on the doorstep of heading into the promised land, of creating something from scratch, creating a nation from scratch. And Moses is giving this address to try and get everyone on the same page for what God has for them. That is Deuteronomy. This is where we're going to be going. So to draw to a couple things, I'm going to hop through a couple chapters, verses, and some things this morning. So it'll be mostly in the first 10 chapters. So you'll be in the neighborhood if you get into the front part of Deuteronomy. To just kind of give you a couple pieces of where this nation is. Let me read chapter 2, verse 7, and I think I'll jump down to 14 probably as well. Yeah, so this is the people. Verse 7, the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hands. He has watched over your journey through this vast wilderness. These 40 years, the Lord your God has been with you, and you have not lacked anything. Remember this, people. And this sort of refrain is going to come up over and over again as Moses is trying to force this in for people to catch on and remember this. Skipping down then to verse 14. 38 years passed from the time we left Kadesh Barnea until we crossed the Zered Valley. By then, that entire generation of fighting men. So I think I don't know if this really matters as the central part of the story, but an interesting part, a detail I would suggest, is that when the fighting men were numbered, those were the ones that were given, when they were unwilling to have the faith to follow God into the promised land, it wasn't the whole generation that got wiped out before others came in ready. It was those that were of the fighting men. So there was actually, it would have been like some younger kids and teenagers that saw the leaving of Egypt. There would have been a little bit of memory there, I suggest. But all of those that were numbered as the fighting men, that age and older, that generation passes away in the wilderness. The entire generation of fighting men had perished from the camp as the Lord had sworn to them. The Lord's hand was against them until he had completely eliminated them from the camp. And so that's That's the shifting of the generation, and now we have these ones who basically grew up in the wilderness, and they're going to be moving into the promised land. So there's these things that show up in Deuteronomy more than once, and this is the one sidebar I want to explore just a little bit, because there might be something more here than I understand what's going on. Perhaps I haven't dug into it quite far enough, but there's something in the wording here, like Moses is the one that's giving Deuteronomy, the one that's writing it down, probably finished by Joshua at the end of Moses' life, but Moses is the one that's giving the address, and then this being written down by him. And there's this phrase that he uses more than once, because Moses as well, if you remember, Moses isn't going to get to go into the promised land either. He has been restricted from going in as well, and it's on his own behavior, yet he writes. So this is chapter 3, verse 26. But because of you, the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me. That is enough, the Lord said. Do not speak to me any more about this matter. And go up to the top of Pisgah and look west and north and south and east. Look at the land with your own eyes, since you are not going to cross the Jordan. But commission Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he will lead this people across and will cause them to inherit the land that you will see. And so there's other spots it'll show up in here as well too, where Moses is like, well, because of you guys, I can't go into the land. It's because of you guys, I don't get to join as well. It's like, was it though, Moses? Let's consult the record. And if you were to flip back to Numbers 20, there's a story in here that seems to tell something different, Mr. Moses. So Moses, and this is, again, perhaps there's some clarity on here I miss. And he's not entirely wrong that it's sort of the people, but it's kind of on him, I would think, unless I'm missing something here as well. But Moses had once already, as the people of Israel in the wilderness, no water, that's a problem. They grumble, complain, yada yada. Moses hits the rock with his staff, which the staff that had been used for all of these plagues and wonders in Egypt. Water comes out of the rock, woohoo, we have water, everyone's good. So this happens again, no water, it's wilderness, these things happen. And in chapter 20 of Numbers, we see this part of the story. In the first month, the whole Israelite community arrived in the desert of Zin, and they stayed at Kadesh. There Miriam died and was buried. Now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses and said, "If only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into the wilderness that we and our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place?" Oh, drama. Come on. Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? I just hear the VeggieTales words in there too, when this back and forth. It was like, we were slaves. It's like, how have you forgotten so quickly? It has no grain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates, and there's no water to drink. Thirst will do that to you too. Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of meeting and fell face down. Love that response. Seek God. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, "Take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that," catch this, "speak to that rock. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink." So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, "Listen, you rebels. Must we bring you water out of this rock?" Man, it seems like something had shifted in Moses already at this point. He was was he getting more full of himself as a leader? I don't know. He had a hard job. But he's speaking to this group, and he's done this before. So he's maybe feeling familiar routine, right? "Must we bring you water out of this rock?" Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. That's what he'd done before once. It worked before. But God had told him, "Speak to the rock." Now that requires a little bit of faith, doesn't it? Because you start talking to rocks to bring water out, and you're going out on a ledge there. But he didn't. Moses raised his arm, struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses, and isn't that interesting? Like, God still honors it. Still like, I'm going to provide for the community. Moses, I really wish you would have had the faith to speak to the rock. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." So kind of on Moses there that he's not going into the land, but I guess if the people didn't grumble, maybe Moses wouldn't have had to go through this whole thing, so maybe there's a justification that because of these people, I don't get to see the promised land. But for Moses, who was a very faithful person through so much, so much, there was these misses every so often as well. And so he accepts it, though. That's the thing. Moses wants to go. God says, don't talk to me about it again. And Moses accepts that. So this is the group that Moses has been leading, that he won't get to follow into the promised land. And so now he knows this. It's this kind of like sending them out of the home, right? Like, oh man, if I can give you these final things to hang on to remember, this is what I'm going to give you so you can go on your way and follow well and be mature and grow up well. That's what the book of Deuteronomy is. And for us as well, let me give you two pieces kind of in parallel here. For us, Deuteronomy isn't just history. There's pieces in there. For us, it isn't just law and covenant and a way of being. Those pieces are in there as well. For us, it's backdrop. It's family history. It's the story of our ancestors as well. And to think of this too, like Jesus quotes from Deuteronomy a few times. So for Jesus, that was his Bible as well. That was the scripture that he had. All of our New Testament writers, that was their scripture. They were writing the New Testament parts. So the older parts in the Old Testament was their scripture. Kind of split up into three different things. The Torah, which is the first 5 books. Pentateuch gets some different names there, which is a lot of this family history of the Israelites and the establishing of the law, the covenant, those things. So the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That big chunk is what was a large section of their scripture, their Old Testament. Then it was split with Torah, and then there's like a acronym, Tanakh. Torah, Nevi'im, which would be more of the prophets, and then the writings as well. So those things all together making up their Bible. And for us, we have it all in a book, which perhaps is a little bit of it's handy for us because it's right here, but it's maybe not always the best way for us to think about the way Scripture is. I've joked with perhaps in our family, sometimes when we're reading Bible or something, we like grab your biblioteca, just because it's fun to say biblioteca. But I think it points to something that's true, because what's a biblioteca? A library. That's French for library, for those that are taking French. And it's fun to say. So, biblioteca, it is a library, and that's what this actually is. It is a library of books. A library of individual books, scrolls originally, that would have been all taken together, or all held in different parts, and maybe you had a certain section of the biblioteca, but not all of it. And when you think of a library, when you're pulling a book out of a library, you know what you're grabbing. You know, you should. You should know the genre of what you're grabbing. Whether you're grabbing fiction and you're going to read it as fiction, you're not going to read fiction as historical fact. If you grab a biography, you know you're grabbing a biography, someone's story. If you're grabbing out of a biblioteca, grabbing some poetry, you know you're reading poetry and perhaps not narrative. And so in the same way, that's a helpful frame for us to look at our biblioteca and know what it is we are reading. So this gives us, this is as well for us source material. Because the more you can get these older parts of the biblioteca inside of you, and then you apply that to reading in the New Testament, you see, oh, you get the reference material, you get the joke. I'm sure all of you are so well connected, you've never been on the outside of an inside joke. But if you've ever had that experience of people laughing because they are on the inside of an inside joke, then you know what it's like. Of like, what was that reference all about? This is the reference material. You'll get the references that Jesus is talking about. You'll get the references that the New Testament writers are talking about if you have this older part of our Bible inside of you. This is an important part. So we don't want to dismiss it as something that, well, that was back then. It's not helpful for us now. It's helpful for us now in more than one way. It gives us context for reading the New Testament. It gives us our ancestry history, the story of our ancestors, but it also gives us something for today, and we'll get to those things as well yet here. So Deuteronomy is, in some ways, speaking of genre, a sermon, a series of sermons. A really long series of sermons that were given at a time. It's probably the best way to think about it. The central section, though, summing up the covenant that God made with his people through Abraham. And so it's a resumming, a reasserting of this covenant for the people. Because Moses is given, like, you guys need this as you go. You're going to need to remember these things. So it's broken down in a few different ways. The first part, the first 11 chapters, 1 to 11, kind of has some of the history and recapping, and then really dives in hard to like Moses repeats himself a lot in there of like, remember, remember, remember. Remember who you were, remember what I'm telling you so that you can remember to be the people of God to where you are going. A lot of that history and then remembering. And it also includes a recap of the Ten Commandments as well. So as part of this covenant law. The first 11 chapters are like that, 1 to 11. The last part, chapters 29 to 34, are not driven quite as hard as the remembering. He's kind of like laid that in already. There, it's a little more of the charge to continue, the challenge that's given to them that they should continue on in. And then there's a song included in there as well, which will not be performed by myself during our time here, but you can work on that in your own time. A charge, a song, and then a blessing as well to the end of it. So the middle section, chapters 12 to 28, which is a big chunk. The middle section of Deuteronomy, when we have like the remembering, we have the charge, the song, and the blessing. The middle is kind of the policy binder. It's in case you were wondering how to behave in this situation, let us consult chapters 12 to 28. So it's got a lot of the nitty-gritty, the details of how to live, how to be, because this group of people didn't know how to be the people of God. And so now they have the reference material. They have what they can look back on and be like, oh, this is how we act. This is how we live. This is how we serve God. This is how we worship God. This is how we love and care for one another. This is how we operate in community. This is how we become the people of God. It's the nitty-gritty details of that. So perhaps not always the most exciting reading for those of you that had to read through a policy binder at some point in your workplace or however that works out. But it is great reference material and the things they needed to know. This is what Deuteronomy looks like. And what I would love for you to be able to do, because we won't get the chance to do it in these sort of settings, is to take mostly the first 11 chapters 1 through 11, and read them in a big chunk. Just read them in all one setting, because you'll see these repetitions that come up. When you read them chapter to chapter, day by day, you might not catch that all at once. But just read through that 1 to 11 in one sitting. Maybe you read it carefully in one sitting. Maybe you read it with a little bit of a skimming, if any of you figured out how to do that well. I don't know that I developed that skill super well, but if you kind of just take the first couple lines of a paragraph and then jump to the next one, and those ideas hold in your mind, and you see how Moses, what he's saying in a big sense. Chapters 1 to 11, read it in a big chunk. I'm not encouraging you to read 12 to 28 in one sitting. You can if you want, and if you somehow commit all those policies to memory, wow, good for you. There's no prizes. But 1 to 11, take it in a big chunk and you'll see some of these things come out. And I hope that would make it a little bit more fruitful for what you're going to catch from our times here as well. Just to kind of give you a little bit of the going forward as well, when we get through the next number of weeks in Deuteronomy, I've kind of picked some of the things we're going to talk about. Some of those things, the topics for the next little bit then, after today, will be of the making them remember. That'll be next week. Make them remember, because that's an important part of what Moses is trying to do. After that, we're going to talk about the 10 words, the 10 commandments that are given. After that, we're going to pick out idolatry, because if you were reading through 1 to 11 in a broad sense, you would see, boy, he gives the 10 commandments. Man, he is harping on idolatry. So why is he harping on idolatry so much for this group? We'll look into that one a little bit more. And then near the end as well, we're going to look at how chosen this people was. It was not anything they had done, but God's choice for them. So what's required then, if starting from scratch? What's required to become a nation? What's required to become the people of God? What can we look to this morning in short that helps a nation become the people of God? It came from a man, Abraham, that God chose. And I hope that those Israelites had that story, that oral history and that story throughout, from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, Israel, Joseph, slavery, and then a free people. Seems a few things that come out in this, what it's required to become a people. It seems like a shared history, and that's what they had. They had a shared ancestry, but they also had a shared history. And Moses is careful to point back to that for them numerous times. This is who you are. This is who God chose you to become. So they had a shared history. So you have something in common to work from. That's huge. That's the reason we gather together as church. We have a shared history. We have something in common, and that's Jesus. Jesus draws different people together because that salvation is open to everyone, and he draws us all together. So they have a shared history. They have a way of being. That's what's given in the law and the covenant, also in Deuteronomy, a way of being. So they have this shared history to build on, but now it's this is how you ought to be. These are the markers that will show you being my people. These are the things that you are to do. And, spoiler alert, they're different than the nations around you. Not always going to be easy. And I'm not sure this third one, if it's necessarily exactly required for becoming a people, for what would be required to become a people. But it seems like there's a shared purpose as well. So shared history, a way of being, and a purpose. Not every nation has a purpose. It may be that nations would take on for themselves, empires would take on for themselves the purpose of perhaps like conquest. Perhaps if you look at Alexander the Great and like Greek Hellenization of like spreading, he had a purpose. He's like, we know all the right things. We're pretty great. Everyone else should believe the same thing. So let's go enforce that. And let's go make people believe that, or we will kill them. Or they can join us, and they'll see how great it is. So there's maybe some shared purpose in conquest. Sometimes a nation might have a shared purpose in, which even could be like financial conquest. Not just giving conquest on people, but like how financially rich can we become? What can we do as a nation to become wealthy? Those sort of things might be a purpose of a people, but it's so different for the people of God. Because the people of God, they have a shared history, they're going to have a way of being, and that way of being is priests. That was the original call that Moses lays out for them, that God had given Moses. You are to be a nation of priests. And priests are not a group of people that are just for themselves. They are a group of people to be for other people, that others may know this God, Yahweh, this good God, that others would know. So they're not to be a nation that's bent on conquest, a nation that's bent on empire. And memory is so short because they're given these instructions of how to be, and in the undertones between the lines, you can kind of see it's like, you came out of slavery. You were under the heel of Pharaoh in Egypt. So don't you dare become that person. Don't you become that nation. That was such a risk. And it was something that did happen. They eventually become the ones that no longer filled with grace. Once they had the upper hand, they were filled with power and pride and idolatry in there as well. So they had a purpose. It's to be the people of God, for the world. And another purpose that got carried out in there, whether they were going to act in the best way that they could or not, was Jesus. And that's what a grand purpose, that the nation of Israel, this people, was the family heritage for Jesus to come so that all others could come as well. Seems to be what's required to become a people. Shared history, a way of being, and a purpose to go forward. To become who they were not, because they were not yet what Moses is trying to inspire them to become. All of this is built not on what they could do, but built on a foundation of faith. Let me point you two things to get to there. Chapter 4, verse 20 is one, and then we're going to go to chapter 11. Chapter 4, verse 20 says, "But as for you, the Lord took you and brought you out of the iron smelting furnace, out of Egypt, to be the people of his inheritance, as you now are." They are the inheritance, so now act like it. And this is the way of being like that. So how do they do that? Through these things that are given to them, but ultimately through faith. Isn't this interesting? That for us, we look at what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be the people of God now, what it means to be a church, what it means to follow after the way of Jesus. It's faith. Faith is the foundation for it. Faith in believing that Jesus is who he said he was, that he died on the cross, that he came back from the grave. Faith in these things, faith in Jesus is the foundation. It's faith. It's nothing we can do on our own. Grace alone through faith. But that didn't start with Jesus. That's been the part of it from the very beginning. Abraham went out in faith. Stories of faith from these our patriarchal fathers and the sisters along in that story as well, with Ruth and the faith that they walked in. And it's been like that from the beginning. And coming out of Egypt and going into the promised land, even the structure of it was built on faith. Check this out. Chapter 11. Verse 10, let's say. Let's go to the beginning of the paragraph. Verse 8. Observe, therefore, all the commands I am giving you today, so that you may have the strength to go in and take over the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, and so that you may live long in the land the Lord swore to your ancestors to give to them and their descendants, a land flowing with milk and honey. Verse 10. The land you are entering to take over is not like the land of Egypt, from which you have come, where you planted your seed and irrigated it by foot as in a vegetable garden. But the land you are crossing the Jordan to take possession of is a land of mountains and valleys that drinks rain from heaven. It is the land the Lord your God cares for. The eyes of the Lord your God are continually on it from the beginning of the year to its end. Isn't that incredible? It's not just we can do it all ourselves. The land of Egypt, where there's the irrigation, the systems in place to be able to do it themselves. It's even where you're going, for your sustenance, not even just how you should behave, for your very survival, you have to depend on me. You have to depend on God in faith for the rain to come to water the crop. So for those of you that is your life, waiting for the rain to come to water the crop, boy, you got something in common with what the Israelites were trying to figure out in the wilderness as well, what they'd come out of Egypt knowing. So I don't know if irrigation is just an Egyptian evil or something like that, but not the point I'm trying to make. But the land itself required faith. It's all built on faith. If you're going to be my people, it's going to require faith. Faith to believe who God is. Faith to speak to the rock instead of striking the rock. Faith to understand, not even understand, faith to follow the way of the people of God, which Moses outlines for them, when really it makes no sense. I can't logic that one out. Sometimes it's faith over logic. It's all been built on faith. So for us, today, we're not coming out of slavery. We're not being built up in the wilderness for a generation and then being given a land that we're going to go into to take, and now we've got to follow this way. We come into it from all different walks of life and all different timing as well. For some of us, maybe we've kind of grown up in the way of Jesus and understanding these things. For others, we maybe grew up in it but refused to listen to it. There's a lot of Israelite familiarity there. And then caught on to it later on. For others, maybe it just you knew nothing of this until stumbling upon it and seeing whoa, this is beautiful. This Jesus is something else. And then you've got all this background, all this history that you've grown up into. And now I'm trying to figure out how to be the people of God, how to be a follower of Jesus when all of our history, all of our foundation is built on a different system of looking out for ourselves, those around us, maybe, but not a system that's others-orientated and especially orientated towards God. So we can identify with this story quite a bit, that it does take some stubborn refusal sometimes to the world around us. It takes a lot of faith to continue on in the way of Jesus, because it sure looks like swimming upstream many, many times. It's very countercultural to walk in the way of Jesus, to walk in the commandments that are the bedrock of what Jesus gave us as well. But we are called out of our surroundings, not to form a commune of our just own people around us, but because the people of God following after the way of Jesus. And then we get to fulfill that original mandate to be priest for the nations, to be a light on a stand, a city on a hill that others may see that Jesus is good. And a blessing flows out of that the same way that God was going to do for the Israelites if they had the faith to follow what he was calling them to. So many overlaps there. It's not as simple. But we're gonna continue to dig into that to see how the Israelites were called to become the people of God, and how this is so true for us as well, to become the people of God, following after the way of Jesus, so that the world around us may be illuminated by his light through us and also come to know Jesus. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, you are good. You are incredibly patient, gracious, loving, and oh so smart. God, we see in your design the beauty of drawing us to yourself, the dependence that's built in there. We need you. We cannot do this on our own. The Israelites could not do it on their own. Thank you for creating dependence. But as we get that opportunity to make the choice, Lord, give us the courage to make that choice day after day. The reminder that we need you. Shape us into the way of Jesus, into the image of your Son, so that we can be a light for those around us. Day by day, God, do this in little ways, in absolutely big ways. We know that you're working, and we trust this to you. Give us the courage to be faithful today. Thank you for this shared history that we have, and this heritage that we have, and this canon of Scripture that is a blessing for us too, God. We're grateful. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.